Hi, my name is David Lewis and I curated the Native Salem art exhibit at the Bush Art Museum. Welcome to Native Salem, the story of the Chemeketa tribes of the Willamette Valley. Follow me as you look around. These are images of Native people and institutions in Salem. This is a Caliph man from Southern Oregon. We have a Caliph man from Salem. We have the original educational institution where they were training Native people about how to be Americans. This is the Willamette Mission, that was the first Methodist institution built in the Willamette Valley. And this is the Lee House down here, the Jason Lee House. That was one of the first houses built in Salem. These images represent the earliest time that white people came into the Willamette Valley and began interacting with the Caliphians and teaching them how to be Americans. I wrote this story about supplanting the Caliphians in Salem, about how the Caliphians were first here in Salem in Chemeketa, how they had a village on the riverbanks, and how the Methodists came from the south and placed their own town here, built their first houses, built mills, they built the educational institution that they brought Native children into, built a larger town that became Salem, Oregon, essentially supplanting them in their places, changing the name of a lot of places. Some of the stories in here are vignettes of the replacing of the Caliphians, the roles they had in the early establishment of Salem, the names of the creeks in the area, which were originally called Chemeketa Creek, now it's called Mill Creek, stories like that. This story is the larger story of how Native people in Oregon and the Willamette Valley lost their rights, their sovereign rights, their rights to dignity, to food, to resources when they moved to reservations. Many people had been heavily affected by diseases in the 1830s, and so some 85 to 97% of most tribes died off. So by the 1850s, tribes were moved to reservations and they were promised a lot of food and resources that they never got. They were actually living in poverty for some 20 years before they were allowed to have any kind of land at all and to sort of make their lives on their own. By the 1870s, the tribes were given a little bit of land, and they were, within 10 years, they were self-sufficient. And so this story, this larger story, is the various events that happened when they were moved to reservations after the treaties and lost much of their rights during the reservation period. These are images out of the Native Rights Lost section of the exhibit. Some of these images are houses at the Grand Ronde Reservation. We see them starting, the tribal people starting up individual farms with very small houses at the reservation. Three of these images, Caliph man and this other Caliph man down here and a Caliph lad, are early 1840s images, actually drawings of the Caliph people. This is the only full-length drawing we have of a Caliph man before removal to the reservation. The other images here are from the 1930s to 1950s. We see the canning operation at the Grand Ronde tribe, where women were involved in working together to do these canned goods to sell on the market. Bottom down here, we see one of the original labels from one of their products, which was blackberry jam. In the same time period, between 1900 and 1950, we see men from the Grand Ronde Reservation that are involved in various pursuits. We see my great-grandfather, John Hudson, was the blacksmith. This is the same man up here in the 1940s into the 1950s. He died in 1953, and he had been an ethnographer, sort of passing on Native stories in the Caliph language to anthropologists in the area. These images are about the people that were involved in producing native art for the tribes. This is a Caliph woman, a woman probably from the area of Eugene, Oregon, her name was Eliza Young, also called Indian Eliza. In her later life, she was a blind woman who made basketry. She made purses mainly. And so we see various images of her on her front porch, in her house, with a car, sometimes, depicting her making baskets. Sometimes she's just there with folks taking pictures of her. This is a purse that she made that's in the exhibit at Grand Ronde. We see her with a basket on her arm here. She probably made that as well. This photo is of the Hudson family at Grand Ronde. They would spend the wintertime making baskets, and in the spring and summer they would sell them in local towns. And so we see the Hudsons here with their pile of baskets they made over the wintertime, ready to sell their baskets on the market. So these baskets here are one art form. The tribes had many different art forms having to do with hunting and fishing and gathering materials. These panels here behind me are about the native art of the Caliphanes that has been somewhat ignored by historians and by art experts, by anthropologists. Caliphanes had a very distinctive art form, as we saw the baskets here, but they collected the weaving materials from all throughout the region, from the mountains, from near the rivers, from the Salem area. We had earlier stories of Lake Labiche, and they would go up here. Chimeccans would go to Lake Labiche to gather materials for making baskets and things like that. So this is that story, that larger story of the tribes, their culture, and what they use in the landscape. This is the first map that was drawn that showed the Caliph territories in the Willamette Valley. This is called the Gibbs Starling Map. It was drawn in 1851. The Gibbs Starling Map shows all of the various locations of the northern Caliph people, shows the original location of Chemeketa or Chemickety here, and also shows the Wallace Plains and some of the original sites and place names around Salem, as well as other place names up and down the Willamette River that were all Caliphian. These are maps of the Salem area again. Here's a mock-up of one of the original place names were in Salem. We see Chemeketa Creek, we see the Chemeketa Village, we see Wallace Prairie, we see Chemeketa Prairie up here, and so this is a mock-up of what the original place names were in Salem. And then we have different tribal territories that have been drawn up regarding the Caliphanes here, the Southern Oregon tribes, and the Chinook tribes in this region also. And then down here below is the place, the reservation the tribes were removed to, the Grand Ronde Indian Reservation. The center of the reservation was in the Grand Ronde Valley, and we see where a lot of the tribal peoples were placed in this valley. This map was drawn at the time of the Willamette Valley Treaty in 1855, and it shows the various ceded territories where the tribes ceded their land to the United States so that they can move to a permanent reservation and get funding and finances and services from the federal government. But we see all these individual places that they originally claimed as their homelands on the map. Thank you for coming to the exhibit. This has been a Native Salem art exhibit. I've tried to show that the Native people were a vibrant culture in this area, in the Salem area, that they were taken over by the Americans. They lost all their land, moved to reservations, lost many of their rights on reservations, and yet their culture is still alive, still living at Grand Ronde and other places in the valley. And here we see some of that. This is about the losses that the Caliphanes experienced over the last 200 years from colonization to the present, when they're trying to now restore their culture.